Hi, I'm Josh Carter, and this is Flying for Life. We're off to the land of the unexpected, also known as Papua New Guinea. In recent months, the country has encountered a national fuel crisis and escalating civil unrest, with Prime Minister James Marape facing a vote of no confidence. So, with so many unknowns, how do you stay safe in such a volatile country? To help me find out, I'm joined by MAF pilot Andrew Symmonds in PNG's Highlands, who was caught up in the recent riots, and Andy Hedley-Smith, MAF International's head of security and former close protection manager at the Metropolitan Police. He's made a career out of keeping people safe, from British royalty and prime ministers to VIPs. He shares his top tips. Well, Andrew, let's start with you. Could you paint us a picture of Papua New Guinea for us, for anyone that has never been there or never even seen it? What's it like?
The tourist board call it the land of the unexpected, which it really is. Usually in good ways and interesting ways, sometimes not so good, but yeah, it's a very different culture to the UK. The people are made up of hundreds of different tribes. There are 800 plus different languages. Yeah, lots of different cultures within the culture. Yeah, it's fascinating and it's really beautiful. It's got mountains and rivers and plains and lovely tropical beaches. So it's worth a visit.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, the place of the unexpected, I know that's been in a rather negative sense recently. Can you tell us a bit about the civil unrest and the violence that you've been seeing there recently?
Yeah, we have been seeing quite a bit of that recently. It's a feature of the culture, unfortunately. It's one of the negatives of PNG that tribal fighting, tribal unrest. It's something that's always there, and recently it's made the headlines because there's been some major fights in Enga and Hela province that made the news in the UK and the US. Yeah, it is something that does happen because of this tribal culture. There are often tensions and arguments and fights over land or things that people have done, sometimes going back decades, generations, sadly. So things do tend to flare up on occasion. But yeah, so within these last few months, there's been a pretty major series of fights in these two provinces in the Highlands.
And are these the results of the strikes that we heard about and the public sector pay dispute? Is that what sort of escalated it?
The strikes and the riots were something else also in the last few months since Christmas. The story we heard there was that the government pay system had an error, and police and different public sector workers had a 300 kina reduction in their pay. That's about £75, but it's a lot of money in PNG. And very quickly, the word went round that this was a new tax that the government had brought in without any discussion. But the government themselves very quickly denied that, said, "No, sorry, it's an error in the computer system, and it'll be reinstated next month, don't or next fortnight, because they get paid fortnightly. Don't worry about it." But by then, the rumor had gone around, and because the pay hadn't been full, the police in Port Moresby decided that they weren't going to work. They were going to protest and demonstrate, just not come to work because of the cut in pay. And then lots of people took that opportunity to loot stores and riot. I think because things were quite on edge anyway because of discontent. I think food prices going up like they have done everywhere, and then this was the final straw, if you like. And then that unrest spread quite quickly from Moresby to other major towns.
I read about people even ripping out cash machines and things like that, and 15 people ending up dead. Is that right?
Yep, those numbers sound about right. Yeah, there were quite a few people killed in that particular incident.
Can you tell us a bit about when the rioters ran onto the runway and you were delayed? Tell us about that.
The trigger was the accidental cut in pay. Baroka, where we live, was one of the places that it did spread to, unexpectedly, because Goroka is actually usually quite calm. It's not one of the more volatile areas. Um, yeah, I was at our base about to depart on a flight, and one of our base guys said, "Oh, hang on a minute, there's lots of people on the runway." They were just, running up and down the runway. The airport vehicles were trying to round them up and get them out. Oh, okay, what's happening here? So yeah, just delayed departure for a while, and then the runway is right next to some stores. The airfield is right in the middle of Goroka town. So from our base, we can also look across the road to some stores, and people were starting to climb on the roofs of stores and trying to get into the stores, but they'd already been locked up. The staff had seen what was happening, so I don't think anyone managed to get into the stores in our area. So yeah, it became a little bit tense. We thought, what's going to happen here? And our base staff locked our base up, locked the doors just in case. But nobody tried to come and attack MAF again. I think probably partly because of the respect that MAF has in the area.
Can you just describe the airstrip to us? Is it one of the very remote ones with grass, or is it a concrete one? Tell us what does it look like?
No, Goroka is uh, a major town. It's on the Highlands Highway, so uh, it's got a long tarmac runway. Domestic airline flights come in. It can handle relatively big aircraft. So we have our own little facility halfway up the runway. So we've got a little taxi onto our grass apron. The main apron is up the top end. So where this trouble was people running around up the top of the runway on the main apron near where the airliners would park.
And Andrew, was that the time as well when you had to fly back to Mount Hagen for safety? Tell us a bit about that.
The crowd was taken out of the airstrip area. They were back the right side of the fence. And then I could depart to where I was supposed to go. And then I was scheduled to come straight back to Goroka. But because things were still a bit unsettled in town, it was decided to not bring the aircraft back just in case the aircraft suffered damage. That was the main reason. So I went to Mount Hagen, about half an hour's flight away from Goroka, where things were still calm at the time, and just waited there a short while until once we got a report that everything was calm in Goroka again, just later that day, only a few hours, and I was able to come back, thankfully.
Now, as well as the violence that we heard about, as well as the looting and the rioting, I believe that an Australian pilot and I think two local telecom workers were kidnapped. I know it wasn't an MAF pilot, was it? But they were kidnapped in the Highlands back in February. So tell us a bit about that. And as a pilot yourself, did that make you feel a bit nervous?
It didn't make me feel unsettled. It was an area that I don't go to personally, but MAF do operate in that area. That's a very rare thing. That doesn't that hasn't happened in PNG for a long time, as far as I'm aware. So there, that was pretty major news, and we did take precautions to not go to that area for a little while until we found out what was going on, and it turned out that the crew and the workers were released pretty quickly. But I think as MAF, we're not targeted in things like that. Not saying that we never would be, but I think we enjoy quite a good standing with the communities, particularly the remote communities that we serve. So, in general, the majority of people in the communities would protect MAF. I can't say that we're completely immune from this sort of thing, but because of what we do and the fact that we are here to help these communities, they do look out for us.
I think that's a good time to bring in our other guest, Andy. Now, you're the head of security, crisis management, and risk for MAF International, which is a very long job title. What exactly does it all mean?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my role is to look at how the organisation is working and how we can try and keep people safe and secure in operating some quite challenging countries. And so PNG is just one of the countries that's particularly challenging. And as Andrew's been saying there, we do work hard to make sure that pilots' houses are safe and secure for them to sleep in and rest in properly. But then also our operations and our flights are also operating in a safe and secure manner. So it's not just about keeping the aircraft in the air, but it's also making sure that the pilots and engineers are safe when they're on the ground, fixing the aircraft and operating the aircraft.
So after, hearing from Andrew about all the unrest there and pilots being kidnapped, I mean, in your view, how safe is he there at the moment? At what point would you say, well, actually, enough is enough and pull people out?
You can't guarantee security, but what you can do is operate in a way that is consistent with our calling. We demonstrate our duty of care to people, and as Andrew was saying, then for a short period of time, they decided not to fly to that region. In that situation, the police intervened very quickly and managed to secure the release of the pilot. When you're in PNG, the acceptance by the community is significant, and we've had situations where one part of the community has perhaps stolen some property from us, and then the village elders go along and they get the property back for us because they say no, you can't steal from MAF. So there's very much that approach that the MAF is valued in the community. Without our flights into the remote areas, then people wouldn't be able to get to medical health care. They wouldn't be able to get their goods transported, their building materials flown into remote areas. So without us, life would be very tough, and they recognise that and they value us for that.
Yeah, it's really good to hear, Andy. And you mentioned their decision not to fly into those dangerous places for a while. Is that a decision that you make, or is that a decision that's made on the ground with the pilots?
That's generally made on the ground. Each of our countries has a lead for security, and they will generally make those fast time decisions themselves. But I'm always here if they want to talk through their rationale, and I'll keep an eye on it from the centre. So part of my job is to read about all the things that are going on in security wise across our MAF programs. And if there's something there I particularly pick up on that I think, oh, I need to have a chat with you about this, I'll reach out to the local security contact, and we'll talk about what's happened and whether that impacts on MAF operations or not.
Andrew, let's just bring you back in. I mean, as a pilot, is that quite frustrating that you're not able to fly out to these places? Like, personally, did you just want to continue, but you knew it probably wasn't a good idea?
It disappoints me slightly that these sorts of things happen on occasion, and then the majority who weren't involved in the incident suffer because the flights that are supposed to be bringing medicines or missions or whatever don't come for a little while. So yeah, it's a bit disappointing.
So you're obviously managing to stay safe, which is good. And let's bring Andy back in now, because I know obviously that's the main part of your job, keeping everybody safe. And as part of that, you run hostile environment courses for enhanced security training. I think you ran one back in February in South Africa. What is involved in that training, Andy?
A lot of people live in sort of countries where there's a lot of law enforcement, there's not much crime happening, and we're often moving them to countries where there is more crime and there is more potential for violence. And so we just want to make sure that our staff are well prepared for that. And so we put them through a series of training. So we talk through about risk and what happens in a situation, what happens during a robbery, what happens if there's gunfire, and start giving them some practical skills and tactics to deal with that. It's been likened to giving people a stress inoculation, and in the same way that we have COVID vaccines and vaccines for other things, what we're doing is actually introducing a little bit of stress to them, so a stressful situation, and then we teach them how to respond to that. And in the same way that when you have a vaccine, your body responds when it meets the real thing. The aim is that if they ever come into a stressful situation where they perhaps unfortunate enough to be robbed or to hear gunfire or be involved in that, then they already know what to do, and they've been through that before, and they remember even deep down that they survived that last time by doing some certain things, and that will hopefully bring them through this time again.
That is a great idea, actually. And you can see how that would work because obviously, if you encounter something for the first time, you're going to have to learn, aren't you? And if you're in a safer environment, how scary is the training though to make it realistic?
Yeah, we use the approach of crawl, walk, and run. So we start off with very simple exercises, and then get them used to that. But obviously, we're doing the classroom input first, before. So we do the classroom input, and then we start doing some simple exercises, and then just gradually make them more challenging. It's not designed to scare people. It's designed to empower and train people. And so there's a big difference between those two. We can make it very scary very easily, but that's not the intent. The intent is to build on the environment. And we saw that in South Africa. We ran a number of exercises, and you can see people's confidence start to grow as they realize they knew what to do in the situation. And quite often we see the first couple of times people perhaps react in a way that's not perhaps the best way. And but then as we start getting used to the drills, then they start responding in a better manner.
Andrew, can you remember your training in this?
I do remember it. It was good. It was helpful. And actually, not long after we arrived in PNG, we were in Mount Hagen for our first few months, and we'd only been in country, I don't know, 2 weeks or something, and there were some local elections. So elections is another thing that does cause things to flare up sometimes. So there was fighting going on outside the compound, and just remembering the advice we'd been given at the training and the people around us, people on the compound with us who had been in country a lot longer, the fact that they were calm, they just said, this happens, stay inside, it'll stop shortly, and nobody's targeting us. If we stay inside the fence, we'll be fine. And that was really great advice. We followed it and everything was good.
Right. Andy, let's just bring you back in because I guess there's always a fine line between managing risk and then, thinking about the safety of people, putting them out altogether. So, do you have like a set criteria for making decisions, or is that a bit hard because of the different places that everyone's working in?
Yeah, it does vary from situation to place, and we have to really think long and hard about whether we should pull families out of the locations we're serving in. We had to evacuate the teams out of South Sudan, so all of our programs have an evacuation plan built into, and they've got an evacuation plan documented. So we're ready to do it if we need to. But it's a decision that we don't take lightly because we're there to serve the local communities, and if we have to evacuate, then we can't be there to serve. But we're also ready that if we need to, we will evacuate people, and it's making that judgment call whether to evacuate or not.
And is that where you are in a country like Haiti? Because I know operations have been suspended there at the moment, haven't they?
Yeah, so MAF US lead on the operations in Haiti, and yes, at the moment the security situation in there is very tense, and there's a lot of work going on to try and make the Haiti operations more secure, and so yeah, that there are times when we do have to pull out the pilots and the families, and the other staff out of the programs because the situations are too tense.
Yeah, a few episodes back, in fact, on the Flying for Life podcast, we did focus in on Haiti. So if anyone wants to go and listen to that, they can and hear firsthand experience. Now, you mentioned South Sudan and the decision to pull out. So what made that decision? Where was the line there? You thought, okay, right, enough is enough. Unfortunately, it goes against what we want to be doing, but got to pull everybody out.
Yeah, it predates me. So that happened in 2016. I didn't join MAF till 2017. In fact, one of the reasons my job was brought into existence was because of what had happened in South Sudan. And so the decision was made that at that time there was the local teams were reporting that there was more gunfire, more conflict on the street, and it was decided that actually it would be a good time to relocate people out of there, which was just the right decision because it actually got significantly worse after we'd managed to pull out all the MAF staff.
Now, you mentioned you joining MAF, and before that, you've had a very interesting career leading the Met Close Protection Unit, and you've actually worked as a close protection officer yourself in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. So, I mean, what is it like doing that in those most dangerous places, Andy?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I spent 8 years on the as part of the Met Police Close Protection Team. It's like the UK's version of the Secret Service. So we go around the world protecting government ministers, prime minister, and the like in different countries. And so yeah, Afghanistan and Yemen and Somalia were quite interesting places to go to. It's things that you'd seen on the news, and then suddenly the next thing you're flying in a helicopter coming out of Lashkar Gah, and sitting with a whole load military personnel as we're being flown around in Chinook and Merlin helicopters. So it was quite interesting. I never expected when I joined the police back in 1985 to be doing that sort of work, but that's the path that God took me on.
So are you basically a bodyguard?
Yeah, we don't generally use the term bodyguard in the police for protection terms, but effectively a protection officer is there to make sure that the VIP, the principal as we call them, is kept safe. And if anything happens, yes, then you have to intervene, which could mean standing between the VIP and the threat. And so we would respond to that. We used to
Wow.
joke that our job was to run away looking brave, and the reality is our job is to get the VIP, the minister, the prime minister, out of the dangerous situation. But more importantly, to try and stop it happening in the first place. So we do a lot of work with intelligence services to understand what was happening in a country to try and stop the bad things happening beforehand.
And I know you've looked after some pretty high profile people. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be running the protection teams for operations for Tony Blair. I took him all in a number of different places. Mr. Cameron, Sir John Major, and then defence secretaries and foreign secretaries and various other ministers as needed in places like I say Somalia, where ministers would go out there and we'd be asked to go and protect them out in those locations. I went to Los Angeles one time with Mr. Blair, and Mr. Blair was speaking to. There's a large Mexican community in Los Angeles, and he was talking to 2,500 Mexicans in a big arena, and it was amazing how many wanted to come along and shake his hand, and we were literally trying to form a bubble around him because you don't know in amongst such a friendly group that there might be someone who wants to do him harm, and that's one of the issues about being a protection officer. You're trying to make sure that they don't come to harm at any time. And the difference between a protection officer and a bodyguard is generally full of muscle, and a protection officer generally we like to think we use our brains a little bit more. And that's not disrespecting to any bodyguards out there, but there is a slight difference between the two. And as a protection officer, you do have to get involved physically sometimes. And with Mr. Blair, we were having to make sure that actually he wasn't getting swamped by people, because that's when you don't know, someone could injure him quite easily.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the time when someone came out with a baboon and a hyena. And this is a very interesting story.
Yeah, that was we took the foreign secretary to Abuja, and it was for the inauguration of President Buhari. So a big event in a place called Eagle Square in Abuja, and there's huge crowds of people thronging the streets celebrating their new president being inaugurated. And we were coming to try and leave the main arena, and we had the foreign secretary sat in the embassy vehicle, which is a big Range Rover with flags on it type thing. And as we were trying to get out of there, we were just swamped with crowds of people. And I looked to the other officer who was with me, and we said, well, "Look, we're going to have to effectively run him out. So we're going to have to run alongside the vehicle and get people off, because the people are literally climbing all over the vehicle, and we, you don't know quite what their intent is." And so we're literally dragging people off the vehicle. And as we did that, I lifted up my gaze slightly, and I saw the crowd was thinning. And I thought, oh, that's really good. We're obviously moving away from the center of the crowd. And I looked slightly further forward, and then I saw the biggest pair of jaws I've ever seen in my life, and it was a hyena. And I thought, that's rather weird. I'm in the middle of a town. There's a hyena there, and then I looked, and there's a baboon next to it, and I realised that both these animals were on a chain. That we've since found out a witch doctor, and a witch doctor would have a baboon, a hyena, and a snake. Now, I never saw the snake around the neck. Apparently, there was one there, because I was more focused on making sure I didn't get bitten by the hyena, because the jaws were absolutely massive, and these two animals weren't particularly pleased. But that's the reason why the crowd had disappeared slightly, because we used that and we managed to get we sent the VIP out, and we got in the backup vehicle and followed them out quickly.
Wow, that is an amazing story. I mean, I'm guessing normally you're trying to protect yourself from guns, not probably hyenas and baboons and snakes. Which foreign secretary was that, Andy?
Yeah, that was Mr. Hammond. So I looked after a number of foreign secretaries in my time, but yeah, that was Mr. Hammond. I think he's Lord Hammond now.
Wow, yeah, Lord Hammond, thanks to you, perhaps. Now, you've been in pretty dangerous situations, including in Mogadishu in Somalia. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Mogadishu, fascinating place. First time I went there, it was pretty scary in some respects because I'd seen the film Black Hawk Down, and when you drive around Mogadishu in an armored vehicle and you look out and there are a lot of destroyed buildings there, it brings back memories of that film. So it was challenging. And one time in particular, we'd taken one of the ministers in, and we'd done a visit to Villa Somalia, and then we then false flagged. We pretended that the minister had flown out so that he could actually stay overnight, and then the next day go and see something else. And we then took him to a factory where they were teaching women how to sew garments, and really empowering local women to do that. And as we were there was a bit of gunfire nearby, and you're always a bit on edge when you hear gunfire somewhere like that. But we recognized that it wasn't sustained gunfire. It wasn't going both ways, if that makes sense. And we were quite relieved when we managed to get back into the airport and get out again later on.
And also, Andy, in Kabul, some of the difficulties that you faced there.
At the times we were going there, it was not under Taliban rule. It was now the Taliban were the terrorist organization that we were effectively up against. And there was one time we went into Kabul, and we'd had intelligence that there were a number of suicide bombers looking for a target in the south of the city, and the minister wanted to go somewhere in the south of the city. And so we looked at some of the locations the minister wanted to go to, and realized that actually we couldn't take them there safely because we knew that there were a number of suicide bombers prowling the streets, in effect, looking for a target, and we would be one of those targets they would want to hit. So we ended up going to somewhere in the north of the city, and that's one of the examples of where, as a protection officer, you're looking to manage the risk and to keep, to enable the minister still to see what they want to see, and to do the work of the British government, but doing it in a safe and secure manner. And effectively, has prepared me for what I do in MAF, because what I'm trying to do in MAF is to keep our pilots operating, but in a safe and secure manner as much as possible.
So, Andy, I mean, you told us about some serious situations there, scary situations. I mean, have you ever thought to yourself, maybe I'll just go and do something else? I don't know, go and work in Tesco and stack shelves, a lot safer. How do you reconcile that with your faith? Does that come into it? Do you feel called to do this kind of work?
Interesting enough, with faith, I've never really felt scared. Well, I did feel scared once in the police, and that was a long time ago as a constable on the beat, when I was fighting with a guy in the middle of the night, and it was just me and him. And that's probably the time I felt probably most scared. And actually, so Afghanistan and Somalia and Yemen, I wouldn't say I was particularly felt scared then. And as a Christian, I know what happens. When I die, I go to heaven. And so the reality is, I'm not blasé to that, because I don't particularly want to die just yet. But I knew that whatever happened to me, I was safe, and I knew the Lord was looking after me.
Let's return to PNG, where we've been hearing about some of the civil unrest there that Andrew, our MAF pilot, has been seeing. And another problem, Andrew, there has been the national fuel crisis as well, which has sort of come along at the same time as all of this. Tell us about that, particularly back in February of this year. What's been going on?
Yeah, it's been quite an intense few months. The fact that all these things come at once. There's a fuel supplier in country, Puma Energy, and over the last couple of years, with the supply has been generally sound, but on occasion, for some reason, they've decided for a day or two that they can't give us any fuel. We don't really know what the issue is. Something to do with business, the company, the banks, the government, and they can't get enough foreign exchange to get fuel from overseas. Can't really get absolutely to the bottom of it, but sometimes Puma don't have fuel to give us, basically. So, say for the last 2 years or so, um, every few months there'd be a day or two where they couldn't give us fuel, which for a day or two isn't a problem because they do supply drum fuel and we keep drum stocks at all of our bases.
What's drum fuel?
A 200-litre drum of aviation fuel, so a big steel drum. Depending where the base is, we've got a number of bases in the country, and depending how likely we are to need to use a drum to fuel rather than the Puma tractor or Bowser that drives around the airport and fuels all the airliners and all the other aircraft. We usually use the Bowser, but if for some reason the Bowser is broken down, which happens occasionally, or say these occasions where Puma have not been able to give us any fuel because they didn't have any or for whatever reason, then we have this stocks of drums. So then we can just use a hand pump to pump the 200 litres per drum into the aircraft.
You mentioned a Bowser driving around. What's that? Because in my mind, that's a character off of Super Mario Brothers.
That's what my son thinks as well, yeah.
Yeah.
A fuel tanker, basically, but it's got a pump and a hose and everything, all part of the unit. So the truck drives up to the aircraft, unreels the hose, plugs into the aircraft, and delivers fuel.
So this fuel shortage, how's it affecting just, ordinary people that you serve? What's been the impact of it?
Back in February, it did have quite an impact for a short while because, as I said, for the last 2 years or so, there's been the odd day or two when we've not been able to get fuel, but then they said, "Oh, there's going to be no fuel for the foreseeable," and that came as a bit of a shock. And the Bowsers stopped delivering to our aircraft. They stopped delivering to all the operators, and we started to use our drum stocks. But the drum stocks wouldn't last very long if we were relying purely on them. We got to the point. Well, I did my own quick calculations. I figured that in Goroka we would have no fuel left within about 3 weeks if we kept using it at the normal rate. So we did have to go down to reduced operations. There was 1 week where we hardly flew at all. We just prioritised really important stuff, things for like medivacs and bookings that we already had for churches and missions and things that are a high priority to us. And the general passengers from A to B or cargo, we didn't fly for a week.
So what are those general flights that were unable to happen? You say passengers going from A to B. What are people doing that you're
Mhm.
kind of helping out with?
Well, because a lot of the country doesn't have roads at all, or some areas have pretty rough roads, and in wet season, then the roads can become impassable. So MAF is basically the way that a lot of people travel around the country from place to place. In Goroka, we have what we call shuttle flights, so we'll go out to particular airfields and either take people from the communities who've been in town for some reason, they've come in to do shopping or they've come to for meetings or to do some business, and then we'll take them back to the community and vice versa. People will call us from the communities and say, there's so many passengers want to come into town. Can you do it next week? And then we schedule accordingly. So those shuttle flights, we really had to cut back on those.
I know that they involve, for example, taking products to market and even helping people grieve and, transport people around who have died. I mean, you tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, a big part of our work, particularly in the Goroka area, is bringing cash crops to market. So coffee and cocoa and peanuts, um, we bring into Goroka where they can be sold to the coffee industry, sold at market. So during that real crisis week, that wasn't a priority. So that does affect the rural economy. The people aren't able to sell their crops, then they don't get the money in. And yeah, a cultural thing. When someone dies, they have to go back to their place. So we do quite a lot of repatriation flights because people do leave the rural areas, come to work in town, go to work in Moresby. Um, so if somebody dies in town, then they need to be taken back to their bush strip, and quite often MAF is the only practical way of doing that. And again, we weren't able to do that for a short while either. So that has quite a big impact culturally and emotionally. We again, fortunately, that that real time of restriction didn't last too long.
And I know that then a decision had to be made about, getting some fuel. I mean, it's very hard to imagine
Mhm.
this because here in the UK, you just think, well, we'll just go somewhere else in the UK for fuel, but you can't do that. So you've actually had to import it from New Zealand. And of course, that is expensive, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yep, that's true. So we've ordered containers full of jet fuel drums, but the price of these drums per litre is twice the price of what we usually get from Puma.
Wow.
So unfortunately, that means we've had to increase prices a little bit. In recent weeks, the time of having to really cut back on flights because of the shortage of fuel only lasted a week in the end, and then Puma are able to supply us again, which is really good. It's a blessing because we've been able to go back to normal operations and serve as many people as we can. Uh, but because we've had to buy this really expensive fuel, we've had to put a price increase on, and but as soon as we can, we'll take that off again.
I'm assuming that means less people are able to afford to fly.
It does. Yeah, we have noticed a little bit of a downturn in bookings.
And have you personally found that, disappointing? Have because obviously you want to be working with the people as much as you can. So I guess that's one of the downsides of this.
Yeah, it is a shame. I mean, if that was the situation in the long term, then that would be really disappointing. But I think the fact that we were able to prioritize the really important flights and keep those going through what turned out to be a relatively short time in the end. When we were looking at this, not knowing where the end point was, then that was really difficult to plan for, obviously. But yeah, it's a blessing that it didn't last too long, and we've been able to go back to normal.
Excellent. Now, Andy, let's bring you back in. From a security point of view, you're obviously keeping an eye on everything that's happening there in PNG. So, what's going to be next? Do you think?
The reality is that almost it's trying to work out what's happening almost globally, and not just locally. And we talk about the fuel issues, but obviously, and they've been having problems for the last 2 years. And we remember that it's just over 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, and so impact things that happen on the world stage impact our programs on a day-to-day basis. And so it's just trying to work out what the next thing is that's going to happen. We do our planning and preparation work for that, but there's a limit to how much you can do, and it's just trying to keep an eye. And things that, as Andrew has been mentioning about election times, are always a challenge there. We haven't got elections for a little bit of time yet in PNG, but we've got them coming up in South Sudan, for example. And so there are other parts of the MAF world that we're looking at things that are happening. And there's always challenges on fuel. Recently, we had a large explosion in Guinea, which took out the main fuel importation route for all the fuel going into Guinea. And so those sorts of challenges are popping up all over the place. Unfortunately, I can't predict the future. Otherwise, it'll make my job a lot easier.
Do you think the fuel shortage, though, feeds into the tensions that are already there in Papua New Guinea?
Yes, definitely. So Papua New Guinea is a fascinating place, but there's a lot of tension there, and it's very quickly things can develop. It's a relatively young country, in terms of its independence, and therefore that there's some of the systems, perhaps some of the benefits that we've had for a long period of time of established countries, they haven't got. And so therefore the number of police they've got, they need a lot of support from other countries. And the Australians have been great in supporting their police in particular, to try and bring order into parts of PNG. So very quickly things can get worse there.
Now, Andrew, you're actually there, and many would say, well, isn't it just too dangerous, to take the risk to have your family there, to live and work there? Why do you stay in a place that is dangerous?
If we really felt it was too dangerous, we wouldn't stay. As we've said, there are risks. It's a different culture to the UK, as Andy touched on. It can be quite a volatile atmosphere at times, but in general, it's calm. The people are friendly. Things do flare up in towns, particularly. The towns are growing. Um, it is very much a developing country, and the towns are growing. They're attracting people from the remote areas, and therefore different tribes come and congregate in towns, and usually it's fine, there's generally pretty good relations, but occasionally something happens and you get tension between the tribes. It can erupt into fighting. We've got our security networks. Someone will report, there's tension at the market, or there's a fight at this particular location in town, just stay away for a little while. And pretty quickly, generally, the police will be on scene and calm it down. And we've had the advice to avoid the area until it's reported that everything's good again. So long as you're sensible about where you go, and you're on the lookout, feeling the atmosphere. Is there tension? Is there a fight happening along that street? Should I not go down there? And it's not that that's happening every day, but if you do find yourself in an area where things seem to be getting a little bit tense, you just disappear, because the tension and the heat isn't directed at us. It's between the different tribes or the different parties who've got some animosity for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And generally we're not a target.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you took part in Andy's training, which you said was very helpful. What other things have you done as well to, manage the risks living in Papua New Guinea?
Well, as Andy touched on, we have a secure compound. A lot of people live in compounds in town, which before we came to PNG, we thought that sounded pretty negative, but actually living on a compound is great. Basically, it's a big garden with a fence around it, and yes, razor wire on the top, but all of our MAF houses in PNG are on compounds generally. In towns, we have a gated compound, so it's secure, but we have really good fellowship and friendships with our neighbours who are also MAF staff, and the kids can all play together. So, and they've got this huge garden to run around in. So from that point of view, it's great. In Hagen, we have guards during the day and the night. Here in Goroka, we just have guards who come in the evening and spend the night. They have their own little hut, little facility on the compound, and they can spend the night there and look out for us. And that's something different to the UK. You don't have a guard who comes to your garden each night in the UK, do you? But it's just the way that has been developed to deal with potential threat. I think Andy alluded to it earlier. The police force in PNG is trying, but they're massively understaffed to cover such a huge country. There are 6,000 police officers, which is only 50 officers per 100,000. Australia, for example, has 5 times more officers per head. So that's what the police force in PNG are dealing with. So these private security arrangements to fill that gap.
Have you ever thought about leaving though, because it's just too dangerous? Was there a particular situation that happened and, just for a while you thought, maybe it's time to get out?
There have been occasions when MAF PNG as a whole, as Andy was talking about, we monitor the situation and think, is it time, do we need to think about evacuation? And there've been situations that have begun to develop, and we've started talking about evacuating the program if things kept going with the wrong trajectory. But fortunately, that hasn't arisen. The fuel thing was one. What if fuel isn't restored? And it wasn't just aviation fuel; it was potentially road vehicle fuel as well. And if worst case scenario, if we didn't have fuel for vehicles to bring food from the ports up to the highlands, food shortages, then how would that develop? So we were thinking, worst case, how long do we wait? Where's our cut-off level? But it didn't develop. Everything was resolved fairly quickly.
And that's all we have time for in this episode. My big thanks to MAF PNG pilot Andrew Symmonds and Andy Hedley-Smith, MAF International's head of security. You've been listening to me, Josh Carter, and Flying for Life, MAF UK's podcast. Until next time, bye for now.